Hello, today I would like to say a few words about a very interesting single-lens reflex camera made by Nippon Kogaku, or later known as Nikon Corporation, in the 1970s. At that time, the Nikon name was reserved only the top-of-the-line professional cameras, such as the Nikon F. Cheaper and simpler cameras probably did not deserve the Nikon name, and in the 1960s Nikon launched a series of cheaper, more amateur-oriented cameras called the Nikkormat, and Nikkormat cameras were probably made by other companies and only sold by Nikon. They were not Nikon design, and they were not manufactured by Nikon. Around mid-1960s, Nikon started making a simpler but more reliable camera, and they called it the Nikkormat, or in Japan it was called the Nikkormat. The camera was the Nikkormat FT. It was a fully mechanical camera with no automatic exposure of any kind. There was also a simpler version of that camera that did not have a TTL light meter at all. It was called the Nikkormat FS. However, the early 1970s were the time when more and more camera companies started making cameras with automatic exposure systems, and Nikon didn't have one. In 1972, Nikon launched the first fully automatic camera with automatic exposure and called it the Nikkormat EL, or the Nikkormat EL in Japan. It was Nikon's first automatic exposure camera, and as you can see on the shutter speed dial, it has the auto position, which indicated automatic exposure. It was an aperture priority system. The user had to set the aperture on the lens, and the camera automatically selected the shutter speed. It was the first Nikon camera with electronically controlled shutter, and as you can see on the dial, there were all manual speeds from 4 seconds to 1,000th of a second, plus B and A. The camera had a metal blade focal plane shutter. To open the camera back, you should pull up the rewind crank, but there is a safety lock. You have to move the safety lock in order to lift the rewind crank, and the camera back opens, and you can see the metal blade shutter. It was probably made by the Japanese company Kopal. This is how it works. The shutter speed selector dial is locked in the auto position. In order to unlock it, you have to press the button in the middle, and turn it. The great advantage of this shutter speed knob is that you can very easily turn it with the tip of your finger. It has click stops at each of the shutter speeds, but the knob is very easy to rotate using just the tip of the index finger, and it is very easy to adjust the shutter speed with the camera held at the eye if the photographer is setting the exposure while looking through the viewfinder. The red 125 figure is the X synchro shutter speed mode. The camera synchronizes with electronic flash guns up to 125th of a second. The shutter speed selector also has a selector for the flash gun type. Now, as you can see, there is a red lightning symbol visible in the small window between B and A, but when you lift the outer ring and rotate it, you can set it to flash bulbs, and at the flash bulb setting the shutter synchronized with the light bulbs at all speeds, even up to 1,000th of a second. As I said, the shutter is controlled mechanically, is controlled electronically, but it is released mechanically, and all shutter speeds, even in the manual mode, are of course controlled electronically, including the B shutter speed, which means that the camera drains battery power during long exposures. There is no separate mechanical shutter speed setting on the selector, but with the battery removed or when the battery is depleted, the shutter automatically works at 1/19th of a second, which can also be used for flash exposures. The film advance lever also acts as a camera on-off switch. And it also mechanically locks the shutter button. When the advance lever is in the lock position, the shutter button is locked and the shutter cannot be released. When it is in the standoff position, and there is a clear click stop here, the camera metering system is turned on, and it remains on all the time so long as the film advance lever is in the standoff position. That is why one should remember to switch the camera off in order to avoid battery depletion. The battery itself is not located anywhere on the bottom of the camera as in modern cameras. Surprisingly enough, the battery is located in the mirror box under the mirror. In order to replace the battery, one has to remove the lens, lift the mirror using the mirror lockup lever, and the battery chamber is under the mirror at the bottom of the mirror chamber, under the mirror. It uses a 6-volt PX28 battery or equivalent. You can put it typical LR or SR44 batteries, or cells actually, but you need to put some extra metal foil in order for it to make good contact. The camera on its back has a battery check button, and when you press the button, the yellow light should light up. Actually, I think the battery is pretty oh no, it actually turns on, which indicates the battery is okay. The shutter speed the film speed range is pretty limited. It is only 25 to 1600 ASA, and there is no exposure compensation scale, as in many older automatic cameras. So if you need to enter an exposure factor or exposure correction factor, you actually have to use the film speed scale. The film speed scale is also locked, and you have to move this lever in order to set the shutter speed. You have to press it towards the ring, and only then is it possible to set the film speed. It has click stops every 3 major values. The interesting feature of the camera is that it has a mirror lockup lever, which is also necessary, as you have seen, to replace the battery. But you can use this mirror lockup lever to reduce camera shake, and it can also be used when you want to mount some older fisheye and super wide angle Nikkor lenses, which go deep into the mirror box. Other than that, it's a pretty usual camera. It has obviously a self-resetting frame counter and so on. It also has a hot shoe with no extra contacts at the time yet, and a typical PC sync socket if you want to plug in different flash gun. This button here is an aperture stop down button. You can depress it in order to stop the aperture down to check the depth of field, and you can see that when you depress it, the aperture stops down. This lever here is, as you can guess, a self-timer lever, and you cock it like this. Of course, the shutter must also be cocked, but the interesting thing is that when you release the shutter, when you press the shutter button, this immediately closes the aperture and locks the mirror up. And then when the self-timer works, it only releases the shutter. In this way, camera shake is reduced. As you can see, the moment the self-timer started, the aperture closed down. You could hear the shutter open and close. The shutter speed was set to 1 second. Now, a quirky thing about this camera is the old Nikon aperture indexing system using the so-called rabbit ears. That system was introduced by Nikon in 1959 with the Nikon F camera, and it was considered very inconvenient to use. Nikon fussed about with this system for as long as 18 years since its launch, because it was only replaced with the new AI aperture indexing system as late as in 1977. That is 18 years after the system was introduced. The quirky thing about this system was that in order to remove the lens from the camera, you had to set the aperture to 5.6. Otherwise, this lever would not go to the position in which the lens can be easily removed from the camera. And for mounting the camera, also the lens must be first set to f5.6. It is practically not possible or very difficult to mount the lens if the aperture is set at any other value. So before mounting the lens, you have to set the aperture to 5.6. Then you have to align it with this metal lever on the camera and turn the lens so that it locks. And this click means that the lens has been locked on the camera. However, this is not everything that you need to do to mount the lens, because the camera needs to know the maximum aperture of the lens in order to meter properly. So in order to index the lens's maximum f value, you have to turn the aperture ring after the lens has been mounted. You have to turn the aperture ring from one stop to the other stop and back, and only after that the lens's maximum f-stop has been indexed into the camera. And you can see it here on this small scale over here, and there are aperture values 1.2, 2.8 and 5.6, and the red dot here indicates the maximum aperture recognized by the camera, which in this case is f2.0, because it's the Nikkor 50mm 2.0 lens. I don't know if it will be possible, probably it will not be possible to show the viewfinder of this camera, but in the viewfinder on the left side of it there is a shutter speed scale, and there are two arrows. One is a transparent green arrow that is operated by turning this shutter speed knob, and the other arrow is a small black a thin black meter needle that indicates the metered shutter speed. The scale visible by the side of the focusing screen also indicates other positions such as B and A. There are also a few interesting things about this camera. As you can see, on the shutter speed scale there is a gap between 4 seconds and B, And rumor has it that originally the camera was supposed to be equipped with an 8-second longest shutter speed. However, again, I cannot verify that, but such information can be found on the internet, that no matter how hard Nikon engineers tried, they could not get a stable 8-second shutter speed in this midway position. And finally they decided to launch the camera with the longest shutter speed of 4 seconds. Actually, I have found it to be true. When you set the shutter speed to a position that would be equivalent to 8 seconds, you get shutter speeds that are more or less 8 seconds long, but it is not stable, and it is not always repeatable. And this was changed in the later model, the Nikon FE, which indeed has the 8-second shutter speed. The camera was available with 3 different focusing screens, as far as I know. Originally it was available with the Type A screen with a split image indicator in the middle. Later it was also available with a microprism ring in the center instead of the split image viewfinder. It is called the Type J screen. But finally, both of those screens were replaced with a Type K universal focusing screen, which has a split image indicator in the middle, surrounded by a microprism ring and Fresnel lens in the outer field. This Type K screen became standard on all Nikon cameras later, in the later years, until the era of autofocus cameras. Unfortunately, the focusing screen in this camera is not user replaceable. In order to get to the focusing screen and potentially replace it, you really have to take apart the entire top of the camera. Therefore, when buying the camera, one had to pay attention to what focusing screen it was equipped with in the factory. It usually said that on the box, on the camera box. So originally you had the choice of either Type A split image or Type J microprism, and later they were replaced with the universal Type K screen. The camera did not have any kind of a motor drive connection. As I said at the beginning, the camera was launched in 1972, and it was made like that until 1976. In 76, an improved model called the Nikkormat ELW was launched, and the letter W, interestingly enough, it was not marked here, it still said EL, but the ELW model had a winder connection. The W in the name stood for a winder connection, so it had electrical and mechanical contacts and positioning pins at the bottom for the auto winder. It was not a very fast winder. I think its top speed was like 1.5 frames per second, or perhaps 2. In 1977, the ELW was replaced with the EL2, and still only the name EL was printed on the pentaprism housing, but the name was changed from Nikkormat to Nikon. And the biggest change in the camera was the introduction of the aperture indexing AI system. So the old rabbit ear system was removed and replaced with a more modern and much more convenient to use AI system.